So we get a lot of influence from listening and being active listeners and showing the people, whether you're in the private sector working with clients, whether you're public sector working in government, or even talking to reporters, showing people that you're actually listening to a conversation and you're actually taking something from it and being an active listener and getting the finer points down. I actually think you gain a lot of influence from that and credibility from that.
Have you ever noticed that some of the best ideas come from unexpected places? Your next breakthrough may come from a leader facing similar challenges, but in a completely different sector. Welcome to Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop. Join us as we explore how today's successful leaders inspire, influence, and connect with others. Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board, who have teamed up to spotlight how great leaders and communicators are making their impact in the world. Allow me to introduce Mike Ricci. Mike served as Maryland Governor Larry Hogan's Director of Communications, overseeing more than 120 public information officers across state agencies and coordinating all marketing and messaging campaigns. He led the state of Maryland's public relations response to the COVID-19 pandemic, coordinating daily press conferences, developing a multi-phase marketing campaign, and leveraging social media to connect directly with constituents. I'm sure he didn't get much sleep during that period. In 2022, the Daily Record named Mike an influential Marylander in the field of communications. Before this, Mike was a longtime leadership aide on Capitol Hill with senior communications roles in the speakerships of both John Boehner and Paul Ryan. For Speaker Ryan, he was Director of Communications, coordinating messaging that led to the enactment of major tax reform and overseeing institutional communications for the U.S. Capitol. For Speaker Boehner, he was Chief Speechwriter and Deputy Director of Communications, overseeing content development and distribution. In spring 2023, Mike was a fellow at the Georgetown Institute of Politics and Public Service, leading a discussion group about crisis communications. And Mike's currently a partner at the firm 7 Letter. So Mike, thank you so much for being with us today and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for having me.
Well, I want to start by asking you, as the trusted communications advisor for an elected official who represents millions of people, there are a lot of stakeholders I think you have to manage and you have to influence, but you also are in a position to influence one very important one, the principal who you work with. So could you start by telling us about that?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned I did the thing at Georgetown last semester, and before I went into the semester, I basically did an unscientific, but I sort of just texted about a dozen communicators I know, especially in government. And I said, what do you think is the one thing you'd want to impart to future up and coming communicators? And almost to a person, Anthony, the response was the importance of communicators having a seat at the table, of being seen by their bosses as strategic partners, of not just having it be like, here's the message of the day, here's a press release, can you please go send this thing, proofread it first, but please go, please send it out right away. And the importance of communicators being seen as problem solvers, because we're the ones on the front lines, we're the ones taking the incoming, pushing the message out, and having that influence, that trust. It really is your leverage. It's your leverage with your own team, showing your team that you have the confidence of the principal, showing the press that you're the main communicator, and it affects everything that comes after in terms of your body language with the press. Sometimes you'll see something go out in the press and then you'll see it walk back a bit and you'll have to wonder, like, what's going on there internally? What's happening? Your ability to have that trust and that credibility, it's hugely important. And it's not just, we think a lot day to day in terms of tactics, but the campaign, whether you're on a campaign or whatever agency you're in, you have to think longer term. Just having that leverage and having that trust, and you build it with different leaders in different ways, obviously. But you mentioned about being an influential Marylander. To the extent that I was an influential Marylander for a time, it was because I had influence with the governor, and people knew that. So people knew if the governor was going to say something or announce something or do something or not say something. If somebody wanted us to not say something about something that was going to happen, usually it went through my office. And that was because they knew that it had to go through me. And the challenge, Anthony, nowadays is, especially on Capitol Hill, where reporters are everywhere, a lot more elected officials are kind of trying to act like their own communications directors. You have senators who have their own conversations. You have members of Congress to do their own tweeting. And so the challenge for a communicator is to still have that leverage and that ability to really try to shape events and to really be at the center of the process.
Yeah. Later, I want to really dive in and talk about how the landscape has changed and,
Yeah.
kind of going directly out to the public or to the press the way that folks on Capitol Hill are doing it now. But before we get there, you talk about having a seat at the table and being seen as a problem solver. That's easier said than done, obviously. A lot of communicators might struggle to build that type of relationship and build that influence on the inside. You've obviously done it very well with 3 really high profile leaders who you have worked with. Um, what's the secret to success of building that type of relationship so that the principal looks at you as a problem solver, looks at you as a partner?
When I was, for me, it was a progression. When I was a deputy communications director for Speaker Boehner, my focus day to day was making sure that my boss, my communications director, making sure they look good. And that meant getting content out, I didn't worry so much. I was, 2 or 3 steps from Speaker Boehner at the time. And so I focused more on making sure my bosses look good and making sure our shop was getting, hitting its markers and getting things out, getting their trust. And that really, for me, was the foundation of, when the time came for Speaker Ryan to look for a communications director, I was fortunate to be considered and to get that post. But, I think a lot of it comes down to, you want to study your principal. I used to say, I was with Governor Hogan for 4 years, and by the end, we spent a lot of time together, obviously preparing for interviews, going over things. He was a big focus on comms, and by the end of it, I really thought about myself almost as a therapist in a sense, and not to belittle that term at all, but just because when you're communicating for somebody, you're really trying to get in their head, and you're really trying to get to their, if you're writing a speech for somebody or you're trying to devise a strategy for somebody, you're almost kind of getting in their head about how they think about things and how they, so studying your principal, Speaker Boehner, he like short meetings, he spoke in shorthand. He didn't have time for a lot of preamble, back and forth. So learning learning that and getting him speeches that showed him that I was doing my research and was on point. Speaker Ryan were a policy wonk, so you had to know your stuff. You couldn't just have messaging on tax reform. You had to know the ins and outs of it. And then Governor Hogan, again, just you had to know Governor Hogan was a voracious reader of clips. And I'm sure there's some communicators on this call who have bosses like that. So I started to get but he would read it in the newspaper, the Dead Tree newspaper. So I would make sure that the copies are delivered to my office to show him that I was also reading the newspaper. I was probably reading it online, but so anyway, I think a lot of it comes down to, thinking more about the person kind of 1 or 2 rungs above you, but also studying your principal and their own style.
Yeah. And it sounds like as you've developed your own philosophy, part of that has been adapting to the needs and the style of the leaders who you're working with.
Yeah, I think you have to it's like that with communications. It's like that with everything. It's like that with managing people. You can't, when you have a communication shop, like government folks will understand this. Usually you're on this little contained unit within a large organization, and you have different roles in communications, and you have to adapt to the different motivations of your people. Some people, they just want to be behind the scenes. Some people, they want to be in the know and have information flow. Some people, they want to be out front. They want to see their tweets out there. They want to see their name in the paper. So you adapt not just to your principal, but you also adapt to the people that you're managing and that are helping you out every day.
So beyond influencing the folks who you're working with on a daily basis, obviously you're influencing a broader public. In today's environment, it's harder than ever to break through the noise. And you've been widely recognized for how effective you were during the pandemic in particular. In fact, your approach was described as, quote, masterclass in crisis communications on CNN. And the Capital Gazette called your performance, quote, consistent, objective, and almost omnipresent. Congratulations. This is like really amazing praise to get. What did you learn during that experience about breaking through and building trust?
I learned that um, my top line there would be that for me, the mess was the message. By that I mean it was such a rapidly evolving situation that I quickly realized that the normal filters for getting things out, putting out a press release or talking to a reporter about something, they just weren't fast enough. And I'm not saying, I would give something to a reporter and I would just sit and wait. And I just realized that events were unfolding much faster than the normal sort of news cycle. Even within a news cycle, it just wasn't fast enough. And so at some point, I just started tweeting, leaning in a bit more with tweeting to the point that I was not just we were live tweeting everything that was happening. I would be sitting in a meeting with the governor, getting a health briefing, and I just started tweeting things in real time. And what this turned into organically was, we had constituents who were, replying and messaging me with their own questions. It got to the point that I was talking to people that couldn't see their loved ones in the hospital, and they were trying to reach them. They were worried about violating stay-at-home orders if they were to, if they split custody of their children, or they were going to drive their children over state lines to bring them to their other parent. So for me, and I will say that approach, it got to the point that I remember I would fall asleep with the phone in my hand, and I would wake up in the middle of the night and just start talking to somebody. It was just like I was a zombie there. You said that I got a lack of sleep. I was definitely a zombie, but for me, it was just breaking the fourth wall and showing people that we were all in this together in terms of nobody knew this. Again, I'm talking about the very early part of the pandemic. Nobody knew what was going on. So, but rather than make it all too polished, too perfect, I would just ship things out the door. And I had to tell you, part of it was I was using it two ways, and that I was sort of being able to crowdsource things that I would see things coming in, and I would point them out to people in other departments or other agencies. Hey, people are having problems with the unemployment website. Hey, people are having problems with school lunches. And so I was able to use it in both ways. And obviously, I tried to sustain it as long as I could. But it did inform me in terms of, I began to get really focused on the idea of making sure that not just us, but all of our jurisdictions had the ability to do direct text-based alerts and notifications to, a lot of states do, a lot of emergency management agencies do, but I got really focused on making sure that there was still individual ways to reach people individually as much as possible. So the mess was the message, mess is the message was my big takeaway from that time period.
Something I really take away from what you shared there, Mike, is that influence is two-way. We think of communication sometimes as, being at a podium or a lectern or issuing a statement. But what you really described there, especially in terms of the use of, social media during that particular moment of the crisis, and kind of crowdsourcing, was that two-way influence.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could speak more to that, because I think that's something that hopefully we can learn from and translate even when we're not in a crisis.
No, that is absolutely right. And I was just thinking about this as you're saying that, people who would message me, they would say, oh, so-and-so friend of mine, so-and-so neighbor said you were helpful with this thing. I'm wondering if you could, if you could help me with this. So I realized that my approach was creating this sort of ripple effect of building trust and credibility with people. And people were coming to me by referral, by, they read an article with my quote in it, or they saw a tweet on television. Now there was a flip side to that. There were people who were not happy, and people who I'd have to let fight with me a bit and punch me a bit on some things, especially people who felt, business owners and were going through some challenges. But I think, one of the things, I'm sure we'll talk about it a bit over the course of this hour, is, I think that we get a lot of influence from listening and being active listeners and showing the people, whether you're in the private sector working with clients, whether you're public sector working in government, or even talking to reporters, showing people that you're actually listening to a conversation and you're actually taking something from it, and being an active listener and getting the finer points down. I actually think you gain a lot of influence from that and credibility from that.
Mike, you mentioned trust and credibility. trust in government is near a 70-year low, with just 16% of the public saying they trust the federal government at least most of the time. That's according to a new poll from the Pew Research Center. What do you think we can do about that?
Um, it's yeah, it's it you know, every time I think those numbers can't get lower, they do. There is no one solution. I think that's why, and we may talk about this as well. It's why I think we need more people from all walks of life to serve in government. One thing we did in Maryland last year was remove barriers where people didn't need college degrees to get more government jobs. Just trying to get more diversity in government, more different perspectives in government, because I think if government, everybody in government starts to talk and look and sound the same, I think that really hurt. You know, everybody's a machine, everybody's a robot. I think that affects trust. I think you know, again, trying to humanize your communications and try to recognize that, you know, recognize imperfections. And I think that's a big part of it. I think we too often you see kind of a hope and hide kind of strategy where people don't comment or put their heads under a rock, and reporters, it kind of can lead them down certain rabbit holes. And I think it's better to just be transparent, be open with people, and try to build relationships that way. But I think just getting more people to serve, getting different perspectives in government, and you know, I could wax on all day about polarization and misinformation, and all of those things need to be tackled. But how can we do that if we don't, if we especially don't have communicators, credible communicators, willing to build good faith and build trust, and be those voices and spokespeople? I just think that, you know, there are all these macro challenges, but I just think a lot of it does come down to getting more people and better talent, more talent, better people into government.
Yeah, it's got to have good people to deal with this, don't you?
Yeah.
I wonder what, you know, you dealt with so much during the pandemic, and right now, public health leaders and communicators, they have a tough job because they're advocating this fall for vaccinations for flu, RSV, and COVID-19 in a very challenging environment. I guess I'd ask you, what advice do you have for those public servants that are in that position now? And, you know, I wonder, how do we recruit more public servants when we make it so tough for them?
I have to say that I have felt, you know, with boosters especially, it's so fascinating how initial messaging decisions are much more important than people realize. And this is a great example, and really should be a case study. There was a point there was an inflection point there back in 2021 where we could have just said that this is like the flu. There's an annual shot that you'll need, that you should get, and that's what'll happen. But that didn't totally, you know, the public health folks it just didn't track for them. And so they didn't, what if the booster got better every 6 months? It was a lot of overthinking, as happens in government. And we ended up with this booster language, and we ended up with booster language complicated by just eligibility. And there was a point where if we had just made it simple, that it'll be like an annual shot and through your pharmacy. And that's an important point. You know, in Maryland, we were early to pursue medium long-term a pharmacy-based strategy, because there was no way we were going to maintain mass vaccination sites, school-based vaccine. We were going to maintain all of that long-term. But pharmacies could do that. And pharmacies sort of ended up in the beginning, as sort of one of many channels. And now they are more out front. That is where people will predominantly go. So I would say, you know, I think trying to leverage pharmacies as much as possible, and their mouthpiece and their omnipresence, so to speak. And I think, you know, just try to make it as, you know, we all tried to make the eligibility as simple as possible. Folks may remember, you know, there were different tables and, you know, ages. And then it was like, if you had special occupations, and,
Yeah.
I think the more we can make it part of your, annual daily lives is important. I think to your point about public health, we and I obviously talked to a lot of public health experts and gained a lot of respect for public health for experts over the course of the pandemic, and all of our deputy health secretaries and folks in the state. Um, it really it it really would be important uh, just to go through all these scenarios and to prepare for future, not just for future pandemics, but we went through a monkeypox issue last year in several states. We went through, we go through different public health crises. So I think the more we can get people into government to help us prepare and to plan and to stress test scenarios and to try to, get people as prepared as possible. I feel this way about all kinds of crises, but especially public health. The more we can do it, and obviously there's playbooks and pandemic prevention. I'm talking about that. I'm talking about communicators having their own lane of preparation and prevention and what works, and maybe doing focus groups and just trying to test things and be prepared, feel more prepared.
Yeah. And I think your point about sometimes there's this balance between overcomplicating things, which are inherently complicated, and having simple messaging. And that if you get it wrong at the beginning, it can really stick. So good lesson there. I want to take a little break from all of this crisis conversation and just take a step back. When did you know that you wanted to be a communicator? Where did that inspiration come from?
I grew up wanting to be. I grew up wanting to be a speechwriter. I grew up during the Reagan administration, and this was back when presidents. It seems quaint now, but presidents used to sit down at the Resolute desk in the Oval Office, address the country at 9:01 p.m. about all manner of topics, and I didn't understand exactly what he was talking about, but I knew it was important. And so I grew up, reading Peggy Noonan's books, studying speeches. I had those like best of speech compilations. And, for me, I was fortunate, Anthony, because it was like a doctor picking the right specialty. And that when I got to Capitol Hill, it's like the mid 2000s, we were just starting to have blogs, social media. Folks on here may remember we used to call it new media because it was so new, but drafting content for that was so far into us. And so being a writer really helped me. And so I always knew that I wanted to be a writer, wanted to be a speech writer. And I was fortunate that I had mentors early on who encouraged me to stay focused on that, to make that how I would stand out, how I would set myself apart. And to this day, I still recommend to people to try to, not just necessarily writing, but try to have some specialty, try to have something. You want to be in this line of work, you want to serve, you want to help people, you're inspired by a certain politician, great, but have something, some skill, something that you're passionate about and that you feel sets you apart.
I think a number of communicators listening in can probably relate to this. Yeah, that image of you that you're sitting on the carpet watching the president give a speech, and you think, I want to be the one who writes that speech. I mean, that's kind of cool because that's something that maybe many communicators have in common.
Yeah, you get to do it. You get to be, when you're a speechwriter, you get to be in rooms, especially when you're a younger speechwriter, you're in rooms that other people aren't in because you're in these crisis situations. And that's part of what helped me later on in terms of, especially with crisis communications. When you're a speechwriter and you're asked to come up with something in response to a shooting or in response to, some kind of crisis, you don't really have time to process. You just have to go right to it. And so that's part of where I kind of learned that resilience.
Now, being a speechwriter, that's kind of a behind the scenes role, hosting a daily press briefing, being on camera. This is quite the opposite. So how did that transition happen?
Reluctantly is anyone who's worked with me will tell you I'm happy to be behind the scenes at my desk in the press shop working with my team. I'm happy to do that. But a couple of things happened for me. First, I began to see the value of not just building relationships with reporters, but also editors, bookers, producers. Sometimes bookers know more about what's going on than the people that are actually doing the shows. And building those relationships helped me to understand better how a segment comes together, how a story comes together, how an investigative report comes together. And those skills help me with other parts of my job every day, directing communications, working with my team. So not just, and I, obviously making friends with some of these folks and building relationships with them is great as well. But it really helped me to understand how to understand it better. If you're too far removed from it, and this, I think other government communicators on here will definitely understand this. Everybody thinks they're a mess. Everybody thinks they're a comms expert. Everybody thinks they're a messenger, and they see a bad story and they want you to fix it and clean it up. But, imagine them having to be in the pocket and learn how this stuff comes together. And it really does, it really does change your perspective. And so part of it for me was, if I was going to be a communications director, I had to really understand better that aspect of things. And the second thing is, for me, becoming, the speaker's office, especially, you have the biggest biggest press team on Capitol Hill. And, I thought it was important, and the governor's office as well. I thought it was important that, when you're in public facing like that, or you're on Twitter, or you're working with reporters, obviously you're going to get some scrapes. It's not going to go perfect all the time. You're going to get some quotes you don't love, and you're going to get criticized. But I wanted my team. I think it's important that your team sees you having to bleed a bit. Your team sees you taking some punches and taking some slings and arrows a bit. That you're not just staying behind the scenes and pushing people out there, and they have to take, all the lumps for you. And I never would want to ask anyone on my team to do something that I couldn't do myself. And so, especially, at the beginning of the Trump era, this became more of an issue, just because, especially when Twitter really started to become super polarizing. But, and, you, again, talking about resilience, you learn, you really have to obviously develop a thicker and thicker skin. But I thought I just thought it was important to my credibility as a manager as well.
When you talk about managing a team, you managed the largest team on Capitol Hill in that role, in the speaker's office. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your philosophy on, or what you learned about building a culture on a team as a leader, because I'm sure that each of the folks you've worked for have their own styles and their differences. But I know you've kind of brought your own approach and have, had to focus on building a team culture. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I really appreciate you asking about this, because anyone who's worked for me would tell you that big believer in culture, and not just camaraderie, but just having a culture in place that's a foundation for whatever happens. It's easy to say, okay, we're all here working for the Speaker of the House, working for a governor, working for this secretary, working for this director. These are great jobs. We all have our roles. But, when you build a culture of trust, was a big thing for me. Trust, not just trust in me as a leader, but trust in each other, because there are going to be times that they'll have to rely on each other in a comm shop, and trust in themselves. I used to always say to people, I need you to try things. Don't be afraid to bring me ideas. I wanted people to build trust in themselves, and having that trust in place, having a culture where people want to try things, take some risks now and then, so that when the crises come, our team with COVID, I'm so proud of our team during COVID, but largely because they really bought into the kind of culture that I was trying to build. I was there for about a year before COVID started, and it was the second term, so a lot of the habits were ingrained, and I didn't want to try to change too much. But because we had put a culture in place, when crises happened, when things went sideways, people knew what they needed to do, knew what I cared about, knew what I put a premium on. So try to build a culture that's built on, trust. But also a big thing for me personally, especially with government and public service and storytelling, is just doing your job with joy. I'm fascinated, still to this day, I'm fascinated to meet people in government, and they're just so miserable, especially communicators. And it's like, well, why? Surely there's something else then you could be doing. Like, if you don't find joy in this, because it takes a lot out of you, it asks a lot more of you than it gives sometimes, and you make sacrifices. And so, my team, I wanted them to have hobbies, have things they care about in their lives, people they care about in their lives. And so I was a big believer in just making sure people were taking care of themselves. And I think that's another way that you build trust. I really do.
As I hear you talk about trust, not just with this question, with the others you answered, it really comes through that trust in yourself, kind of going out from that, the trust you build with your team. And then, that leads to that trust you can build with the public. And it sounds like it'd be really difficult to build trust with the public if you didn't have those other pieces of it. I'm wondering if you could talk about specifically what it's like communicating on behalf of an elected official, compared from other types of communications roles. And I wonder if that trust piece, might be one difference, how you build it and how you establish it, but other differences that you could share about that very unique role of being the trusted communications advisor, partner for an elected official.
Um, it- yeah, I was thinking about this morning. Uh, this is it's a quick analogy. Irish people in Ireland, when they order an Irish coffee in Ireland, they usually say they want it hot to touch. They want the glass to be hot. It's just, to them, that's what makes it. And for me, communicating for an elected official, everything is hot to touch. Every issue, corporate leaders, nonprofit leaders, they can think more in quarters, years, even decades. They can set a marketing campaign in place based on focus groups, polling. They can think much more broadly and pick and choose their spots generally. Obviously, there are exceptions to that. Whereas when you were for an elected official and you're on the front foot and you're out there every day, you have to try and have a message of the day while managing a crisis of the day, while managing a shiny ball or 2 or 5 of the day. And that, Anthony, I think is the biggest thing. Is, I think communicators on here would agree, it's getting your boss or your office not to engage on every shiny ball, every issue that comes your way, because it can just take you off track for days, if not weeks somehow. If you say the wrong thing, or you just drain energy from your main message. One thing the leaders I worked for were all great about was they understood the importance of repetition and of keeping the main thing, and sticking to what they cared about and what they wanted to advance, whether it was a bill or an initiative or making an issue more salient. And just, when you're the governor, especially anyone who works, I know we have a lot of local folks on here, when you work especially in state and local government, anything can be an issue, but it's definitely gonna be an issue if you respond to it. So if you get involved in some local scrap, or there's some grant issue, there's every day there's endless choices. And then the big thing is that everything is just your hand is just so close to the stove every day. And that includes you yourself. I mean, you're obviously going to face, and this was one challenge that definitely has changed in recent years that I had to focus on, was especially working in state government, where I have so many communicators, people being targeted online, cyberbullying. I had a communicator who she went on an annual family vacation, and somebody like posted pictures from it and complained that she wasn't working hard, and she left government, not long after. And it's just a great regret of mine. And so, but I'm not complaining. I mean, we're public officials. We are accountable to the public, but it's a risk that people need to be aware of. And I think that, but the biggest thing is just trying to keep distance between the hot button stuff and the stuff that you want to talk about, the stories you want to tell. Whereas in corporate life or private sector life, it's just so different. I mean, things, the way you plan and the way you look at things.
Well, and I'm sure part of that is that folks from the outside, they know how to rib these officials in a way that they want to get off track and respond. And so you talked earlier about, not just kind of pushing whatever message out there, but being a partner how do you develop your style and ability to speak up when you're in the room and say things that, might be difficult to say to a principal or in a group of folks? Because I know that's something that you've built the ability to do in your career, and I'm curious sort of what you've learned along the way and advice you have for others who are trying to do that too.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, this is something I'm still learning today, especially, in the private sector, where you have more meetings, especially virtual style meetings like this, and you have, less time with your client or the person you're working with. And I think, again, I think a lot of it comes down to studying your principal and understanding their style. Speaker Boehner, for him, 15 minutes was a long meeting, and that includes foreign dignitaries and ambassadors that would come, to the speaker's office. He just felt like 15 minutes, you can get a lot done. You can get all your points in. And so you had to kind of learn his shorthand and learn like what would make him nod or would make him kind of shoo you away. And whereas Governor Hogan, he sort of believed in these longer team of rivals style meetings where people just went back and forth. And, so I learned to sort of, instead of just getting into these, meetings and going down these rabbit holes, I learned the value of, kind of being the person who kind of broke it all down at the end. Like, here's the decision point. Because for communicators, that's a lot of it. We just want to kind of focus on a strategy and get a strategy and a direction in place. Some folks, they're fine sort of punting and talking ad infinitum. So I sort of tried to be the, wait a minute, let's figure out what we're going to do here kind of person, as opposed to just talking and talking. And another thing is just figuring out what your principal cares about. Sometimes your principal cares about what's in a story or a headline. Speaker Ryan, I think he had Google alerts, but I don't know if he actually read any clips day to day. He cared more about what, how our members were doing. He cared more about how our policies were advancing. And so you kind of brief him from that perspective. So I think, cutting against the grain when everybody's kind of where the groupthink is going in one direction, and I'm sure folks on here can identify with this because it happens all the time. You're going from a meeting thinking one thing, and everybody, there's all this groupthink all of a sudden. So there's nothing wrong with, I don't mean playing devil's advocate, there's nothing wrong with being sort of the hold on a second, like let's consider the other side of this person. And then, or just being kind of the person that tries to break everything down and keep us on point. Because I think for communicators especially, it can be hard, having meetings that are ineffectual and that go to nowhere can be very challenging. You really want to get an outcome. You really want to, because you have 1,000 things going on, and you really want to get to where you need to be. But it's every leader's style is different, but I don't think you can take the same style into every meeting.
Yeah. I wonder, we've talked about media and clips, but we've also talked about social media. I wonder how you have balanced the need to reach people on various channels with, just the tried and true lessons of communications, and keeping those in mind and not just adapting to the latest, app or tech platform.
Yeah, I'm still a proponent of focusing on sound bites, of just thinking about, if it's something for print, how would you want to see it in the paper? If you're doing a TV interview, what do you want the network or whoever, the outlet you're working with how do you want them to bill it? If you're going on a podcast, how do you want them to bill it? And a lot of that comes down to, I think it's a bit of a science. I really do. But, when I would bring, when Governor Hogan and I would get ready for Sunday shows, we would prep on a variety of topics. But then at the end, the value of it really is to shape narratives and print stories for the week. So I would sort of say to him, like, well, what do you want the headline to be? And and we would just kind of go over these lines and just keep honing it down until we got to the one that would be the most quotable. And it sort of became a game to see if that's what folks would use as the quote. And most of the time we were right. Sometimes he would take liberties on other topics and it would be something else. But I'm still, I still think it's important to, no matter what platform you're on, to just have a clear, effective, succinct message, and to just think about what you want that main billing to be. And again, no matter what, obviously different forms have different levels of creativity. Another thing that I think is really important, and there's so many studies about this, I'm fascinated to this. At this point, I'm still, I used to get these ads in my LinkedIn about how the press release is dead. There's a whole thing that somebody was doing. And I don't agree with that at all. I think press release still has a valuable place in an organization and for stakeholders and the public in terms of framing all your information. The issue is, just to your point about different channels, is how you adapt it for the times that we're in. If you're sending out a press release without a graphic, you have a lot less chance of engagement. If you're not using social content based on your press release and chopping it up for different, platforms. But to me, a press release is still a huge flagship product that you really want to hone. And obviously it can be, I'm not saying there's some senators like Chuck Schumer infamously has like eight headlines and all kinds of 16 paragraphs. I'm not saying that, but I think before you get too involved in what goes on social, I think a press release is still a great way to frame your messaging and how you want to get it out.
Yeah. That's it's really interesting to hear that, because you're right. A lot of people do say the press release is dead. And what I think I'm hearing you say about that is um, not necessarily using it exactly in the way that one might have used it before, assuming that, just having a press release is going to get picked up, but using that as a vehicle to frame your message. And then from that come, the other, if you have that first, you're going to have better social content, and, you're going to have an image with it and like increase the likelihood of it getting picked up.
You're
Am I saying that right?
Yes, and you're going to have it has a higher value internally. A press release might end up a way that you sort of internally litigate a policy, and then if
Yeah.
it's or you're pitching a reporter down the line, instead of piecing together all these tweets, other things you've done, you have it all in one place in a press release to show them the history of the issue. So, to me, yeah, it's just a flagship piece of work that, again, maybe it doesn't have the reach that it used to have, but I just still see the high intangible value in the exercise.
And you say the exercise, the process of it is so powerful. I don't know a leader or a communicator who isn't asking themselves in today's environment, how is AI going to impact, or how is it already impacting my organization? And you've seen how technology has impacted government communications across your career. Uh, but look, you could use AI to generate a press release, and you're gonna miss the whole process, right? Which is where you see the value. I'm just curious what thoughts you have about AI from your experience as a government communications leader.
Yeah, that was sort of becoming a bigger thing towards obviously the end of my time in government. And I would say that like any new platform, two things. One, like any new platform, does it fit with your overall mission? I remember when Snapchat came along, when TikTok came along, and we met with these people. We want to start a TikTok. Well, why? What's going to be our, how does that fit with what we're doing? Do we really need another channel to? So if you're going to adopt AI, just think about how, especially as communicators, how does it fit? Like I saw Speaker McCarthy's office is using AI to make graphics. That probably saves them time and creative time and energy. Obviously, and I will say to folks, you'll notice it's going to get, and this will be its own skill, but I have seen, you can kind of tell now what AI processed writing looks like, including in press releases. It has a certain starchiness to it, I'll just say. But so I think just how it fits your overall mission is important. The second thing, though, and I feel much more strongly about, sometimes we rush to do the next big thing. It's important we still get the things that were the fundamentals of communications right. Like, I bet we've got communicators on here who are trying to improve their websites, make them more responsive to mobile phones, improve their accessibility for people who are deaf and hard of hearing, making sure you have ASL interpreters at press conferences, making sure you can reliably live stream. We still have a lot of governments, a lot of committees, a lot of folks who don't have reliable live streams for reporters and the public, or don't have ways for people to deliver input or provide community feedback. I remember we had an issue last year in Maryland. We had one jurisdiction that really didn't have a way to text its, I talked about this earlier, didn't really have a way to text its residents. They thought they had to build a public notice by just tweeting about something. It doesn't really count. There's only a small percentage of people on Twitter. So I would say AI sounds great, but don't let it take away time from energy and resources, from the fundamental things you're trying to do to reach people, people in their daily lives, folks out there who aren't as politically attuned as you or I, and the folks on here. Like, don't let go of those things. They're hugely important.
Yeah, when you talk about technology, I'm just reminded we interviewed on the Chief Influencer podcast, Monica Goldson, who at the time was the head of Prince George's County Schools. And during the pandemic, they instituted a telephone town hall system. But what I thought was really unique about it was it called the parents and would say, this is going to start, press 1 to listen in. And they had tens of thousands of folks, press 1, put it on speaker while they were driving or cooking dinner. And just that one simple change versus hoping people would remember to dial in. And so just thinking about ways to use technology in government to serve the public, there's some great ways to do it, but then there are also some ways that, the shortcuts might detract from your goal.
Yeah, that's great. Teletown halls are great.
So today's fireside chat was inspired by your guest commentary published earlier this year that opened with, quote, public service remains a noble calling. It is singularly gratifying, if at times grueling, work that offers the opportunity to make a difference and represent the people. We've had some questions from our listeners come in specifically about public service. One was uh, a really great one, wondering what would you change or improve about state level communications if you had to navigate the pandemic crisis again?
Oh gosh. Um, yeah. I mean, I would definitely have spent more time building the communications infrastructure to reach people, reach residents. We had text-based, we had a text-based, Maryland has it, it's called MD Ready, that they use for storms especially. It just wasn't as built out at the time. I would have just done a whole like email marketing. I would have done like a whole email marketing campaign. I would have worked with, I would have tried to build this list up as much as possible. We haven't really done a lot, and these are just small examples. We really hadn't done a lot with Instagram in the governor's office, and then at the beginning of the pandemic, they brought me some analytics showing that we'd had explosive growth in our first few weeks, especially among younger people. And so I realized that was a way to reach people. Nextdoor is kind of polarizing right now because it tends to lean towards people with negative comments on what's going on. But I found the posts had huge reach. So one thing I would change if I could do it again is I would just have much more infrastructure in place to just get the word out. That's, it's my point about me tweeting out. I mean, that was fine, but I would have loved to just have, and that was nobody's fault. We just, again, nobody was prepared for that kind of thing. And the second thing I would say is, one thing we tried in Maryland, we had, and a lot of emergency managers on here will know, it's called joint information centers. So getting communicators to come in and sort of be on call 24/7. I would have just, I think it's important it's a good thing to do, but, sort of having a kitchen cabinet of your communicators, even if, to your point of public health communicators, even if that isn't their specialty, but they're good communicators, sort of bringing in your best communicators in the middle of a crisis. We were able to do that rather quickly, but I would have had all of that infrastructure in place ahead of time as well. I would have had my, 10 to 12 best people together in one place.
Hindsight's 2020, but it's always good to think through these things because it can plant seeds for the future. So I really appreciate those ideas, and hearing like Nextdoor as a platform, I think is really interesting because it's sometimes not on folks' radar at all, but there's a lot of communication happening there, and it's where neighbors are getting things from one another.
People who are engaged, obviously it does skew older, but these are engaged residents who hopefully you're trying to, you're also to your point about, to the point about influencers, those folks are influencers too. If you can reach the key folks in a neighborhood, they can help you. Doing that during COVID, I would talk to somebody. I would say, can you get the word? How would you get the word out to your friends, group text, whatever? I mean, that's important to, not just reach broad groups of people, but reach the right people, reach the right communicators.
Yeah. One of our listeners said that they appreciate your emphasis on the power of repetition and the importance of keeping the main thing. They wonder what your approach is to counseling public executives on communications for the main thing and other issues that are important. For example, important acknowledgement, social responsibility, et cetera.
Well, I think knowing the things that your leaders care about and finding ways to show them how something might dovetail with that issue, and trying to, I'm not saying you're fitting a square peg into a round hole, but trying to show them how it would help build out that overall issue and the salience of that issue, I think is important. I think with Governor Hogan, obviously a lot of it was about not just COVID, but a lot of it for us was about, state level leadership, governors leading. And so there were issues, refugees from Afghanistan, there were issues from time to time that would have crossover with national politics going on in the national landscape that related to my job was to show how it related again, from a communications perspective, obviously there's policy arguments to be made and other things, but I think it's hard to go in from a cold start, is my point. It's hard to go in and just, hey, I got this thing that I've seen this before. People come in, you can tell it's something they care about, their bugaboo, and you're just, it's hard. I think it's hard to have a cold start. I think you want to try to put it in their wheelhouse, put it in their, put it in their lane to the extent that you can in a way that they understand, and try to get their buy-in, for it. I think that's important.
Yeah, we recently interviewed a CEO of a health system, and he said as he's grown in his career, he's learned the most important thing he can do is, if he has an idea, get everyone else to think it was their idea. It sounds like that might be another way of saying a little bit of what you just said.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would look, if something came up and I could find, like, if I had to get the governor's buy-in on something, if I could find an old quote of his or an old thing, something I could point to, say, hey, this was something you cared. You got to do your homework. You got to find it. That's a great point. You want to, get people's buy-in. Really important.
Yeah. It takes some maturity too, because, sometimes we like to get credit for our own ideas. And so kind of having others own those, like, oh, that was a great idea you had there. I think that's sort of a growth thing. So it's a fun thing to think about. Others who have been recognized as a chief influencer like you have told us that they don't always get inspiration from their direct industry peers, but sometimes they find inspiration in different spaces. And I wonder, as you think about, whether it's building trust or whether it's finding unique ways to get a message out, where have you gotten inspiration beyond the world of, government communicators that you know so well?
As a writer, I'm a big believer in reading good writing. So obviously, and not just that, but also I think it's important to study the process of great writers. So, like a lot of folks right now, I'm into Taylor Swift, and not just the music, but also she tends to put online how she puts a song together and what her process is. I grew up with Billy Joel's music, and I was fascinated not just by the music itself, but the stories of how he would come up with these songs and how they related to people in his life, and who they were based on, and sort of taking from their processes and the world around you, I think is really important. And I had some of the best advice I got actually in college. I think I was just trying to kiss up to a professor of mine, and I wanted a list of like government books I could read over the summer. And Anthony sent me a list of 12 books they were about like physics. They were about nothing related to government. And his point was, learn from other people, learn from other smart people, learn from how, these are people who are influential in their fields. These are things that might help you learn about behavioral, politics. And so it was great advice. And I gave it to my students last semester at Georgetown. Like, get out and learn more about the world around you. It's not just about, you don't have to go home and watch Fox News all night and go on Twitter. You can branch out. It's okay.
Oh, that's such a good reminder, right? Because when we look at other fields or things, you might think, well, this book doesn't have anything to do with my work. That's sometimes when you find the best lesson or the best nugget. Are you reading anything interesting right now that you'd share with us?
It's a good question. I read a lot of books about British politics, actually. So I actually probably read more about British politics than I do American politics. So I'm reading. There's a new book. There's an author, Anthony Selden. He does books about each prime minister, and he's up to his Boris Johnson book, which, as you can imagine, is very exciting. So I'm reading that. I'm reading that right now. I like to read British politics, and whatever my kids make me read.
Right. That's great. Well, I just have to say, Mike, as I think about some of the themes that we discussed today, that, the big one that just comes through for me is trust. And really what stuck with me is, as a communicator, of course, you want to build trust with the public and whoever, that constituency is that you're getting the message out to. But what I think we learned from you is, to do that as a communicator, you have to build a partnership with the principal you work with and have a trusted relationship with them so you can, have a two-way dialogue. And you have to build trust with your team and a strong culture. And the root of all that is, you said it, it kind of was in there quickly, but really stuck me. you have to trust yourself. And, taking that time, learning about other fields, you gave a lot of examples of things you can do to build that. So that's really a theme that sticks through with me that I think all of us, no matter what role we're in, can learn from. And I just want to thank you for your time today, and sharing your expertise with us.
No, thank you. And thanks to all the folks who joined. Anybody on here that wants to connect, obviously I'm on LinkedIn and would love to, get to know more folks who are interested in government and getting involved in public service. And I really appreciate the opportunity to do this.
That's awesome. So yeah, you can find Mike Ricci on LinkedIn, currently with 7-letter, if there happen to be multiple Mike Ricci's. And we look forward to sharing this with a broader audience too.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Chief Influencer, a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board. If you know a leader who should be featured as a chief influencer, please nominate them at chiefinfluencer.org. For show notes and more, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn. Until next time.